Hello all, welcome to alexjwilson.com, and we are at episode 3 on my journey on how I'm turning $39,300 into $1 million. And I invite you to join my journey and start your own journey. If you want to reach out and start yours, just reach out down below. My contact information here is phone number, email, and I'd love to chat with you. So today, we're going to talk about the myth of the Toronto housing bubble and condo bubble. I've been doing a presentation like this for a number of years, so I wanted to share this with you because that's a lot of questions I get going, well, Alex, it's great that you've made this growth, but we think there's a bubble and we see there's going to be a crash. Well, today I'm going to talk about the long-term fundamentals of the Toronto housing market and why it is still going to continue to grow. So number one, let's talk about the economics of the Toronto market. So Toronto, as a percentage of the gross domestic product of Canada, that's the economic output of Canada, is responsible for nearly 20% of the economic activity for all of Canada. Now let's put this in perspective for you. In 2013, Alberta and Toronto were nearly identical in their economic output for all of Canada. Alberta was 331 billion, Toronto was 330 billion. Quebec was 337 billion. Toronto is on par at a provincial level with Alberta and Quebec for their economic output, their gross domestic product for all of Canada. And to put that even in a larger perspective, we all know the city of New York. The city of New York is responsible only 7.9% of the gross domestic product for all of the United States. So here we are in the Greater Toronto Area, the census metropolitan area of Toronto, and we're responsible for nearly 20% of the economic output of all of Canada. That's a big, big number. That means that we are the economic engine of all of Canada. Continuing on that, let's look at jobs. So job-wise, yes, we know oil and gas is in Alberta, but if you're looking at a head office job, the majority of head offices for all of Canada are located again in the Greater Toronto Area. You want to know why that is? Because if we look at the census metropolitan area of Toronto, we have over 20% of the population of all of Canada. So we have the economic activity, we're the economic engine of Canada. We are the largest source of population within Canada, a very, very small area, the greater census metropolitan area of Toronto. So we have population, and we have economic engine, we have people, and we have money. For me, that's where I'd want to invest in my housing needs. So speaking of population-wise, let's talk about population growth. Population growth by 2036, which may seem in numbers a long time, that is less than 20 years. In less than 20 years, the population of the Greater Toronto area is going to be 9.2 million people. So those cranes you see in the air, well, we need those cranes to house all the individuals that are going to be coming to this area. And why are they coming to this area? We're the economic engine, and we have the jobs. We need roofs over their head. So we continue to need those buildings, this infrastructure, to accommodate all that growth. Other areas of growth, immigration-wise. And this is one I really like to talk about. Immigration-wise, we're in a very interesting time in the world. And what I tell my investors is, Canada is really an oasis in a sea of chaos. So if I'm in a developing country and I'm a wealthy individual, and the one thing my wealth can't buy is I can't buy freedom for my family, or a level, there's only a certain level of safety I can provide for my family. So where am I going to move my family? Where am I going to send my son or daughter to go to school? Well, previously I'd look at the UK Well, they just closed their borders due to Brexit. They're leaving the European Union because they feel immigration is ruining the way of British life. So they left the European Union. They're closing off their borders. The US, they elected Donald Trump based on we need to focus on making America great again, closing our borders. Well, Canada, we're still open for business. We are that oasis in the sea of chaos. We have a very valuable currency, and that currency is safe and boring. And if I have my family and I need to move my family somewhere, safe and boring is what I want, and that's extremely valuable on today's market. So not only are we the economic engine of Canada, population center of Canada, Canada is the place where people want to move to for all around the world. And let's even talk about this more. Toronto is the most multicultural city in the world, in the entire world. So if I'm an international moving to Toronto, most likely I'll have family here, or friends here, or at the very least, my ethnic culture. There will be a population of my ethnic culture here in the Greater Toronto area, so I can make a smooth transition to this new country to raise my family and start a new life. These are big things. These are great fundamentals for the long-term growth of the Greater Toronto area. And let's talk about this a little more. You know, what's just south of me? That's Lake Ontario. And Lake Ontario is part of the Great Lakes system. And the Great Lakes system is one of the largest sources of fresh water in the world. And what's one of the future currencies in the world going to be? Water, fresh water. And we have it on our doorstep, another thing that we take for granted. So obviously, economic engine, population center, population growth, all happening in the Greater Toronto area. So let's look at the freehold housing market in Toronto. So in Toronto specifically, not the Greater Toronto area, but just in Toronto. The freehold housing market is your detached, semi-detached, and freehold townhouse. So that supply, it's not even fixed, it's decreasing. I have a decreasing supply of freehold housing. And why that is, if I have two post-war bungalows, I'll knock them down, I'll put a larger house, or maybe I'll wipe out a whole city block of houses and put a higher density project in there. So I have a decreasing supply of freehold properties, but only increasing demand. We talked about population growth, but even if we look just at internal growth in Toronto, half the condos downtown are occupied by millennials. That's people born in the early 80s to late 90s. They have a desire to live in these properties. So again, putting constant pressure on the freehold market, and that has led to continued price growth, where we see now the average price of a detached home in the Toronto area is $1.5 million. Why this is important is that the dream for the millennial to buy a house is gone. It's not a realistic dream anymore. And the reason that is that they physically can't afford to buy one of these properties. And I'm not even talking about the monthly payments. It's the actual capital you need to buy one of these properties. If I were to buy $1 million property, and that's not going to get you much for a house in Toronto, $1 million property, I need $235,000 of after-tax capital. That's my 20% down, my double land transfer tax, and my lawyer fees. I'm looking at around $235,000. How many millennials have $235,000 of after-tax capital sitting in their bank account? So this is what happens. We talk about the condo towers. Well, what's going to happen is millennials are going to stay in the condos longer. And instead of going from a one-bedroom to a house, they'll be going from a one-bedroom and upgrading to a two-bedroom, and they're going to start raising their families in these condo buildings. Because another big factor is millennials love convenience. I love convenience. Condo living is fantastic. I can take an elevator down and go to the grocery store, and go to the drugstore, and go to the restaurant, I can get on the subway. I don't need a car for that. So there's a huge convenience factor living in a condo-wise, and I'll sacrifice my space so I get the conveniences of living in this big metropolitan area. And just from the pure supply and demand, supply, there we go, like that, the freehold market is out of the question anyway, so they have to live in these condos, and that is the new reality here in the Toronto real estate market. People have to change their perspective that condos are going to be the new norm that people are going to be living in here in Toronto. And one final point. Let's talk about people movement. So people movement. I've been saying great things about Toronto, but one thing we don't do very well is public infrastructure. Our public transit is absolutely deplorable. It's very difficult to get from point A to point B in this city. So when we look at our high value areas, they're typically on our subway lines or rapid transit lines. There's huge pockets still in the city that are undervalued, but it's because, again, I can't get from point A to point B. People don't measure their commute by miles, they measure by minutes. How long will it take me to get from point A to point B? And because we have such poor public transit infrastructure, we see rapid increases in prices in these areas where I can get to point A to point B very, very quickly. But if we had proper infrastructure, we could spread out this demand across a greater area, but we don't have that. And even if I were to make an announcement tomorrow and I was the government and I were to put shovels in the ground, that infrastructure isn't going to be ready for 10 years. So we're going to see increased congestion here in Toronto as the population growth continues, but there's no new transit coming online that's going to be ready anytime soon. So there'll still be consistent congestion and growth in the city, but no relief in sight. So that's why we will continue to see growth in the Toronto condo market, because people want to get closer to work so they can spend that valuable time with their families or doing other activities than actually spending it in traffic or trying to get around. So overall, those are our very prime reasons why the fundamentals of the Toronto market are going to continue to grow. Next week, we're going to talk about why the initiatives that the provincial government announced are actually going to lead to increases in rent and increases in condo prices, and they're going to have the exact opposite effect of what the government wanted to do. So I hope you learned a lot today. Again, my information is below, alexjwilson.com, making your real estate dreams come true, helping you retire early and build generational wealth. Okay guys, talk soon. Bye-bye.